Steps to Holistic Solvent Sovereignty with Kenneth Scott, aka Ken Cousens, co-founder of PanTerra D'Oro, private society and private contract association. This is Live the Impossible Show, here to rock your world with quantum leaps on how to change reality, lead with passion, and co-create your dream. Tora, Pam, and Oliver dive deep with legendary conscious and world-changing leaders. Dare to be different and unleash your genius at our Holy Land membership site, wholyland.me. Practical Steps to Holistic Solvent Sovereignty with Kenneth Scott, aka Ken Cousens, co-founder of PanTerra D'Oro, private society and private contract association. Ken describes common law and its history, canon law, ecclesiastical law, commercial law, martial law, and different jurisdictions. He walks us through the history of the money system, the importance of solvency, and the true value financial system of the near future. How do we give our consent and contract without knowing? Why are we obliged to reincarnate? Is Nesara a way out? Who is King David and the House of Solomon? And why is it relevant today? How does the Bible fit into law and politics? Welcome to another Live the Impossible show with our special guest today, returning from just a few weeks ago, Ken Scott, aka Kenneth Cousens, House of Cousens. Welcome back.
Thank you. Happy to be here. And believe it or not, it was only a week ago.
Yeah, it's only a week ago we recorded, but we couldn't help it. We had to do a follow-up.
Yeah. And I didn't I didn't get to meet you last time, so it's just like this is in a way for me as well, so I can get to connect with you. So I look forward to get more connection without just being an audience.
Yeah. And we've got Henrik with us again, co-hosting. So welcome, Henrik. Good to have you.
And his pet rock behind him.
Yeah.
His ascension rock.
Yeah. If you're wondering what we're talking about and you're listening to the audio, you'll have to do the video to see what that is.
My house is full of those, so
Good.
Yeah. And I just loved the energy and everything that you brought, so many things together into this more holistic way of this whole path of freedom, and that it's so much more than knowing the laws and the paperwork, and really bring it to what is the future we want. So there was a few things that we didn't get to touch upon, so also hence the follow-up here. So maybe we should start a little bit and go back through some of the things that we started with, which was the common law, and maybe start there.
Okay. Well, since you're new to the party, Tora, let me ask you, how do you understand what common law is?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I realize every time it seems like people are not agreeing. So it's like, oh, that's what it is. And then it changes. I perceived it as the law where we do no harm. So it's the law of the land. I don't know if it's the same as natural law or it's similar. That one I will have you to answer. I also know there's a lot of common law within that they speak within the law system, legal system. Yeah. And it seems like it's almost two different things. So that is where I'm a little bit confused.
Okay.
So I'm happy you can explain it to me.
Unconfuse you. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, very good starting point. And so, yes, and almost everybody is confused because it is designed to be confusing. And of course, we have what people call attorneys at bar, meaning the bar association. Where does the bar association come from? And it's designed as an elite club that if you're not in it, you are basically subject to it by the things that we talked about last time, the principal elements of law, of jurisdiction and contract, being the fundamental of law as a generic, all-encompassing subject. So we can say there is law as a general, all-encompassing subject, and it has many forms or jurisdictional levels. Okay, and they are not necessarily functional in how most of the population deals with them as hierarchical level, like this is level 10, level 9, 8, 7, 6, up to 1. But ultimately, it is designed that way. And so in the system that we are all, or up till now, have been subject to, it is very much a hierarchical, layered structure. What is at the top of that structure is canon law and ecclesiastical law, hence the church, the Roman Catholic Church, to be specific. So I could enumerate the different jurisdictions or forms of law: canon law, ecclesiastical law, kingdom law, corporate law, commercial law, common law, equity, natural law, codified systems of admiralty and maritime. And those are the major elements of jurisdiction. So the biggest issue with attempting to be free is you need to know where you are and what is attaching to you. And so then we have to know how we are attached to those things, and those things meaning those forms of law. Then we could define the specific term that people refer to as common law. And if we're talking about those different jurisdictional elements I just named off, then we would refer to what is generically called common law as law with a capital L. Okay, so that in itself can be confusing. Oh, you're talking about law as an all-encompassing system that has kingdom law, ecclesiastical law, commercial law, and all the rest of it. Or you're talking about law as it applies to what is called common law? Where is the origin of common law? How does that relate to who I am at this time? So common law, generally speaking, is English law. So we would refer to English common law, and then the American system coming out of the English law system. And then when the United States and the United States of America ostensibly achieved sovereign status, it adopted the English common law as a foundation of its system. And all of the states, the 13 original states, the ones that came after, ostensibly, not as an absolute, but ostensibly, because there's some modifier historical components there, but ostensibly chose common law as their basis. 49 of the 50 states. One state did not, Louisiana. Louisiana is, its basis of law is Roman civil law. That's because it was a French colony originally. And in the early 1800s, it was, in 1803, it was purchased by the United States and then eventually became a state, and it retained civil law or Roman civil law as its law form. I'm going to tie all this together. This is very important, and nothing in history happens by accident. The construction of leading to where we're at today with the United States and the corporate form that it took on in the 1870s and so forth, it all was designed over many, many, many hundreds of years. So the reason Louisiana retained Roman civil law, and in 1803, Napoleon in Europe sold what we call the Louisiana Purchase, which was really only the municipality of New Orleans. The rest of what we were taught in American school, the Louisiana Purchase, that supposedly went of this big swath of land all the way up to Kansas and the plains and everything, that was not actually part of the Louisiana Purchase. We were led to believe it was, but that land was held by the original natives who had been there for many thousands of years. The primary native tribe, if you will, was called the Washita, and they were a Black race, and they came from Egypt and the Nubian royalty and so forth. So they were considered a royalty race up until this so-called Napoleonic or the Louisiana Purchase. That's another story that we won't go into, but that's an important historical point. But Napoleon and his teams were completing something called the Napoleonic Code, which was finished right after the Louisiana Purchase. And the Napoleonic Code was just an updating of the Roman civil law system. And so Louisiana retained, or New Orleans retained that as their law form. And this is an important point because this goes back to what is Roman civil law. Basically, Roman civil law is the management of a civil body under military conquest. So we can go back to military conquest and understand that this was ultimately a global agenda, starting with the Roman Empire that conquered a large part of Europe and North Africa and put all of those states basically into the Roman Empire and instituted Roman civil law as a management of a conquered people and territory. Eventually, that led to the formation of something called the Holy Roman Empire through the 800s into the 1500s. And in 1520, Carlos V, who became King of Spain, who was the grandson of Ferdinand and Isabella, who sent Columbus over to, quote unquote, discover America, he became the Holy Roman Emperor out of the House of Habsburg, which was a Germanic Germanic house that had controlled the Holy Roman Empire for 400 or 500, well, at that time in the 1500s, only about 75 years. But eventually, over 400 or 500 years, the Habsburg house controlled the Holy Roman Empire, both through Spain and through the English crown. So when Spain conquered all of what we now call Latin America, they instituted Roman civil law. So this is a conquered people system for managing a military occupation and civil body. So the history of the United States was going from adopting a base of English common law to getting to the point where the government, the federal entity, was put into a corporate form. It had been bankrupt since the beginning in 1789, and it went through several 70-year periods, 3 periods of 70 years as a bankrupt until the year 1999. And in the process, also integrated military occupation or military conquest to then convert the Americas to a Roman civil law system. And the Commonwealth that we now call the English Commonwealth after the so-called British Empire supposedly disappeared and got translated into a Commonwealth with like 143 Commonwealth countries. They're also essentially corporatized national corporations with the bankrupt structure under admiralty and civil legal codified system, Roman civil code and civil law, so that ultimately the entire world is under a bankrupt military occupation. And so going back to common law, people believe, a lot of very sophisticated and educated researchers believe, okay, we need common law to achieve sovereignty. Okay, because if I have common law, I'm a sovereign. We have things like in the United States, groups who for years and years have been saying, okay, we're forming common law grand juries. And as a grand jury, we can sit in that law form and adjudicate things that pertain to dealing with this corporation that has us under its thumb, under what I just described. We've got the International Court, International Tribunal of, how's it? Sasha Stone's group.
For International Tribunal for Justice and Peace, isn't that
right,
what it's
right,
called?
etc. And several others. Kevin Annette from Canada, who's been dealing with the church and the issue of the children that were killed in Canada and, of course, everywhere else on the planet. And he has his court. But the problem is they have no standing. They say it's in common law. But as I said in our first session, if you are a bankrupt, and if you are attached to a bankrupt entity that you've accepted contracts and benefits and privileges and operated over and over every single day for our adult lives, we volunteered when we go and apply to be a driver in commerce. We go to, here in the States, Department of Motor Vehicles, and we say we want a driver license. So we volunteer to attach to ourselves a license, which is a privilege to do what? To operate a motor vehicle, which is in commerce and essentially is a form of a trust, a form of a corporation, a form of a vessel in commerce, in the sea of commerce. And we're operating it as a commercial franchise. That commercial franchise, as we discussed last time, is a debtor facility to create what's called public funds under public policy since March 9th, 1933, when FDR and the Congress put the United States into full military occupation and full public policy, which was the maintenance or the management of the civil body under rules that had to apply to anybody who volunteered to first be a driver in commerce, to create a debtor facility through the conversion of the live birth to a birth record and a record of vital statistics and all the rest of that. And the end result is we have no standing. Okay, so we can do all these things, form all these courts, grand juries, international courts, and whatever, but they have no force and effect. There is no, they may bring forth a lot of public awareness, which they are definitely doing, and that's been good. But if we are to achieve something where the people actually have true standing and capacity to enforce issues that we're facing, we have to know who and where we are. We have to know how to remove ourselves from the attachments that basically neutralize any capacity to do anything. We have to understand these layers and places of jurisdictions of law that I enumerated. So there's more to common law. The English form basically started emerging in the 1200s. We have the Magna Carta signed in the year 1215, but 2 years before that, King John signed an instrument with the Pope, and he gave all of his rights, all of his titles, all of his lands in perpetuity attached to his line of succession. He gave that to the Pope. And after the Magna Carta was, it's called the Holy Alliance, and many people call it the Unholy Alliance. But the barons who forced John to sign the Magna Carta, they were having somebody sign who didn't have the absolute authority to do so. Okay. Secondly, the barons wrote up that document, the Magna Carta, the great letter, the great charter of rights, in which we get a jury of peers and many other things. But peers refers to peerage. Okay. If you have a jury of peers, it's the peerage. You have to be of the peerage. Who are the peerage? The landed gentry, the aristocracy, those who have standing on the land by title that they have received by grant of land made patent by a sovereign king who has a crown, who has been coronated by a pope, who has claimed absolute authority over kings and priests. Okay. And so understanding kings and priests, the line of the king that controls all the land, and the line of the priest that has control over all the law, that binds the flesh and the souls of the people. They purport to say they control and bind the land, but they actually know that they can't. They do not have the authority the way they set it up. So what we have to find is a transfer mechanism and a receptacle to have standing to really come together jurisdictionally, lawfully, and with all the integrated components of law, equity, and so forth, to be able to have the capacity that we want. And the ultimate capacity, or the ultimate fundamental, is, yes, we want to say we're sovereign. You know, as we talked about last time, this universe is hardwired. The fundamental fabric of it is sovereign free will. We want sovereign integrity to direct our sovereign free will. But within the legal system, within the Babylonian money magic system and the matrix, as we call it, the real issue is, are you a bankrupt or are you solvent? When we say solvent, it means you're not bonded and attached to monetized debt or bonds that we are, since the day we were born, we have been put into literal bondage, but in a monetary terminology, we're bonded to debt as a bankrupt. And you have no standing. You're not on the land. You're literally lifted off the land. And then we go into the religious constructs and spiritual paths and New Age stuff. It's all formulated to put our minds into the mode of thinking we have to get out of here. And the more we try to get out of here, the more something else is getting in these bodies, because it's the genetics and the incarnate form that is the prize on this planet. Okay, so the only way out is in, to take absolute control and embodiment as a soul and a spirit and a universal being, to embody into this incarnate form and get into it. And remove the attachments, remove the vows and oaths and attachments that we have attached to ourselves in this and many other lifetimes. And we're entangled with karma and trauma and biological corruption through all the chemicals and toxicity and everything. We were just talking before we started recording about clearing the body. So it's all an integrated whole. And that's how we have to approach our body, and we have to approach our status within the law form on the planet. We have to understand it. We have to get our consciousness open to actually understand how it works, and not parrot or perpetuate urban myths and patriot myths that are out there that purport to achieve something and really don't.
I find it super interesting, you also talking about Napoleon and all of that, as this is something I've been looking into a lot, due to that my great-great-grandfather was Napoleon's right-hand guy, and he became the king of Sweden. So I can also see how,
so in other words, it's all your fault, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, I'm part of it's in my genes of this agenda playing out. And we have had so many conversations around this that I think, it's not a mistake. This happens for a reason, to also rebut those genetic implants and attachments and all of that, and somehow redeem and shift the reality, so they don't no longer have the grip, because I can, these kingdoms of coming then from this Napoleon era is all over the world, all over Europe.
Some of them. Let me correct one thing. We do not want to rebut. Okay, rebut puts you into a controversy. Okay. They declare one thing, you rebut it, you disagree with it. Now you're in a controversy. You've just given them jurisdiction. So one of the absolute key requirements for everybody to understand is how to use what actually is here, not to reject it, not to polarize with it, not to go out and protest and yell and scream and all the rest of it, but actually to have the knowledge and the intelligence and the grounding and the will to know how to, just like in the movie The Matrix, Neo. He did not, when he finally figured it out, first in the first movie, he saw the code in the Matrix, and when the agents attacked him, he didn't have to do anything. In fact, he could just use his left hand and kind of, do this. You can't see my hand, just battle him while he's reading a book, And in the third movie, he said at a certain point, when everything's war, they're battling, he finally said, I know what I need to do. Because see, he had embodied and integrated the code of the Matrix. So he knew he had to go back to the source and face it and basically accept it. Because the minute we go into polarity or resistance, we are caught. We are locked into their dynamic and their game and their control mechanisms. And that's where all these people who are pursuing remedies and law have made fatal mistakes. Some truly, literally fatal, some many going to jail and prison, others just entangling themselves in years and years and years of battle in the courtroom. Okay.
But then you have the word in it itself. It's a battle, So it is coming from that within the peace and
right. And so our whole approach in what I've deciphered in the code of the Matrix and in what we teach in GEMSTONE University and so forth is going to peace. And it's not a polarity construct. It doesn't mean, leaving the opposite of war. It means the internal process of resolving those things that have been polarized within us and learning equity and the maximums of equity and how equity works in tandem or in complement with the law. We'll get back to that in a minute, back to common law.
So it's about basically getting the balance between the two. So it's not going either or, it's getting that middle road to bring the two in together.
Right.
And do you think that's why they're really trying at the moment to make us even more polar? I mean, they're really pushing all these polar agendas. Is that part of the entrapment?
Yeah, it's been used for thousands and thousands of years. And there's this guy named Machiavelli, who wrote this book called The Prince, and it's called the Machiavellian Principle, which is divide and conquer, get them always to fight amongst themselves, and then we can control them. So the answer is not more war, not more conflict. And this operates in the courtroom and in the law form, that if we do not, well, let me explain a couple of key things. I talked about the Uniform Commercial Code, or the UCC, last time, and that it's universal on the planet now, and it basically is how commercial paper that becomes negotiable instruments. And negotiability means it can pass from one holder or party to the next and becomes a form of circulating currency, or what we call money. And that the UCC defines three fundamental things: a secured party, a debtor, and the attached collateral. And as I said, the Uniform Commercial Code is about mariners and merchants and their property. Okay. So obviously mariners keeps us on the sea of commerce. Merchants basically is a matter of exchanging negotiable paper, bills of exchange, promissory notes, and so forth, which is all part of the secured party process. But it, as I said, keeps you still in a creditor-debtor relationship. But we can use that to our benefit as we need to. And the underlying functional principles of the UCC is that you're either in honor or dishonor. when somebody presents something to you, a contract or anything, a bill or a court order, you can either honor or dishonor. We always want to stay in honor. Okay. When you go to court and you say, yes, your honor, you are recognizing him as being in honor. But the minute you start arguing something, or you're saying, oh, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a sovereign, whatever, you are now in dishonor because you're bound by the contracts that you signed and entered into with the obligations of those contracts. And now you are breaching those contracts. You're in dishonor. And there are three ways to be in honor, which is a full unconditional acceptance of something. A conditional acceptance, like somebody gives you a bill and you know it's wrong, you say, I accept this condition upon or subject to your proof of claim. And the third one is to refuse it for cause if there is a material defect. Like somebody gives you a check to pay for something, but it's not signed. Well, that's a material defect. You can refuse that tender, commercial tender for settlement of the obligation by returning it for cause, and then he can correct that. Okay. So those are the three ways to stay in honor. Two ways to stay in dishonor are silence, which is equal to acquiescence or agreement. Somebody sends you a bill for $1 million and you throw it in the trash, and he sends you the next two steps and notice of fault and default. You go into full dishonor and he can now perfect a claim. Okay. That's silence. That's a default, and that is a dishonor. The other is rejection. Okay. So when you rebut something, you're rejecting it, you are immediately in dishonor. You have lost. Okay. But we go deeper than that in terms of what underlies commerce. What underlies these commercial papers and everything that keeps us bound to perpetual debt is underlying estates, understanding what a trust and what an estate is, which gets into equity, because a trust and an estate have beneficiaries. So there's beneficial rights and equitable interest in every form, every trust. And what we don't know, most people don't know, is we have this franchise. We're bonded to it as the surety guaranteeing the paper that's been created in that name and that account. But underlying that is an estate, which I did talk about last time, which ultimately is the ancestral estate, which is ultimately the quantum whole of our genetic, of our entirety of our being, both the biological genetics and a quantum multidimensional universal sense of genetics, which is our being. And that all of this commercial paper has two sides to the fence. You know, are you familiar with general accounting, where you have what's called a T graph or a T bar? Mm-hmm. One side is the debits, the other side is the credits. Mm-hmm. It's called a zero-sum game. The debit has to be matched by the credit. Well, the debit is the charge, the equity is the discharge. And when somebody sends you a bill, they are acting as an executor of your estate, with the state, the corporate state, which is ultimately the Vatican, the Crown, and so forth, acting as the executor of the estate that you abandoned. When you abandon something in maritime law, like if a ship and a crew flounder on the rocks and they leave it, that's an abandoned vessel. It's subject to claim and salvage. You can claim that vessel and salvage it. That's literally why it's said that the captain must go down with his ship. Okay, because if the captain abandons the ship, then it becomes subject to salvage. And his contract binds him to go down with the ship, because if he goes down with the ship, then the parent company, the owner of the ship, who he has contracted to do that, to either deliver it to port or go down with it if it's lost at sea, if he goes down with it, then the real party in interest still retains claim on it. But if it's abandoned, it's subject to salvage and claim. So what we did, or what our parents did at birth, soon after birth, is they abandoned our estate. They informed on us by declaring that we were a foundling, that we had no true patrimony, no lineage in terms of our ancestral estate, and therefore we became a ward of the state. And as a ward of the state, we then are subject to a rule called guardian-ward relationship. Okay. And so, and it's no accident that you have these movies that entertain kids and big kids called Guardians of the Galaxy and things like that. So a guardian in legal terms has no true standing as a lawful man or woman or a lawful parent. Legal guardians is much different than a lawful parent. So our estate was abandoned. We became a ward of the state, and therefore the state becomes the executor of the estate, and the entire bureaucracy on a planetary level is the ongoing executor management of our estates, which they're using as an underlying value to create public funds that are monetized debt that we're attached to. So we've taken the license to drive this vessel in commerce and motor vehicles, to operate it, to take benefits and privileges, and but we have no access to the equity underlying there. And every time we go into controversy, we're subject to the tribunals that they call courts to adjudicate what's best for the public, for the civil body, which we are part of or attached to. So the key is understanding where law sits, where it doesn't, where commercial relationships sit and where they don't, and where equity operates, and where maritime rules operate, where estate law, which goes back to equity, and how we shift from being a bonded surety to a private living being with standing on the land with an equitable estate and beneficiary or beneficial rights, and returning the control of the office of the executor into our directive control rather than the estate. Okay. Then it gets into the subject of monetary function. How are things monetized? Right now, the way they are universally across the board on this planet, except for very few exceptions, they're all monetized in a form of debt through commercial paper under bankruptcy rules and admiralty and military occupation, which gets back to Henrik and your first question last week of usufruct. Who gets to use of my fruct? Who gets to use the fruits of my creative capacity? And what kind of limitations are imposed on me to follow the rules to play in the game that I've agreed to play in? So we don't rebut anything. We don't reject anything. We accept it. The biggest power we have in this game is the power of acceptance, settlement, and closure of any claim or obligation, whether perfected or contingent, and how to separate from all that bondage and move out of that matrix and return to the full capacity and standing as a planetary corporeal body form, as well as a universal being.
So does the military occupation, is that anything to do with martial law, or is it totally separate?
No, of course it does. Yeah. So we have technically in one way been under martial law for at least 2,000 years under the Roman Empire. And then the Holy Roman Empire, and then the Empire State of New York, and the Federal Reserve systems, and so forth. In the United States, basically the United States of America started both as a bankrupt and as a military government in 1789. Okay, and it's too many details that eat up too much time to go into that. But basically, the federal entity, the United States of America, in conjunction with the United States, that became the Congress representing the states and then the people, started as a bankrupt and basically started as a military occupation. But then it was shifted after the Civil War into a corporate form, incorporating a municipal government in District of Columbia, And then that was put into bankruptcy in 1933. And then through the various other mechanisms by the 1940s, most of the so-called sovereign states on the planet, nation states, were also put into bankruptcy and became a national corporation by and through the United States Securities and Exchange System. And so we have one corporation that is basically bankrupt, and all the subdivisions, and then all the attachments to the persons and the property and the flesh and blah, 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 and the rest of it. So now we are in a situation where I'm sure you guys follow what's going on in the United States and with Trump and his supposedly leaving the office and Biden and whatever. Well, what needs to be understood is that master corporation by and through the United States corporation that touches on every nation state and every person and living being attached to those persons, that corporate entity has been completely liquidated and dissolved. Hence, we are no longer in a bankrupt global estate. Okay, what will follow here in weeks and months and years to come is how we clean up the mess and how we have to educate the masses to understand what has happened, because extremely few have any clue. Okay, but it's going to hit them like a tsunami very, very soon. As I said last week, it's coming.
So what would be the consequences of this,
dissolution, liquidation? Yeah. It's too complex to go into in a short conversation like this. This is what we are building, the education in GEMSTONE University. And as I said last week, we're building towards and preparing to move a vast majority of what we've developed over many years into the public so that we can make it available to anybody who wants it, not just as a member of PanTerra. But see, everything in this system has been designed to be perpetual loops that you can never get out of. That's true in law, true in money systems, true in bankruptcy, never-ending cycles from birth to death. And then even in the reincarnational cycle and in the multidimensional cycle, that if you contracted with this global body and were given benefits, privileges, you operated your commercial franchise and so forth, and you died in debt, which we all do in the current system, then technically in a free will universe, the creditor, which are all these unseen forces that structured all this and operate behind the puppets that we deal with in politicians and bankers and so forth, they say, well, we gave you all this credit, say, you died in debt, so now we essentially own your soul, and we have the authority under universal law, because you did it under sovereign free will, to recycle you to go back and try and pay it off. If you don't pay it off next time, well, we'll see you on next time around. We'll do it again and again and again. And we have literally been doing this for millions of years.
So basically,
I have a question to what you're explaining. When you explain the concept of bankruptcy, I mean, I pretty much get the idea from a bank's point of view, but from an equitable point of view, how would you explain the bankruptcy? Why would the banks be put into bankruptcy?
Well, the banks operate in bankruptcy. Up to now, they're all bankrupt too, because they're dealing with debt paper. There's no substance, there's no lawful money that they are managing, and they are subject, going back to March of 1933, FDR was inaugurated on March 4th. On March 6th, he issued something called Proclamation 2039 that proclaimed a bank holiday and certain rules according to that. For 3 days, everything would be shut down. And then on March 9th, Congress issued that particular Congress, the 73rd Congress, issued its first act called the Emergency Banking Relief Act that shifted everything under the executive office as a manager of the monetary system of the United States during the emergency. It's called Emergency Banking Relief Act. Did various other things, including converting U.S. persons and all persons subject to the jurisdiction of the United States under those rules. And so when the Federal Reserve note in the 1940s became the reserve note of the entire global system, and all the central banks use Federal Reserve notes as a reserve currency, that was a military script, a private issued military script for the maintenance and management of the corporate body, the civil body, which is the conquered persons and property. And pay note that I say persons, not people, not living beings. So that meant that every national corporation in bankruptcy using Federal Reserve notes as a debt instrument, as their reserve to issue through their central bank of issue, their Australian dollars and Mexican pesos and so forth, were persons subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. This is how they contained the entire body politic of the planet.
I comprehend that, but before that time, there was actual value behind the money. There was actual substance, gold, silver, that was taken out of circulation in 33. Why would that be? Why would that be an advantage for the system?
Because the ultimate goal was to put the entire world into bankruptcy and create the legal nexus by attachment, a voluntary attachment to the bankrupt system, the bankrupt franchises, because then, again, this would lead us to too much complexity for this conversation. It takes a lot of cross-referencing, which I'll come back to this, but I want to say here that whether we're studying law or money mechanics or bankruptcy or world history or even biological health and genetics and all the relationships, if it's not approached as a whole system, to see all the interconnecting dynamics and connections between all of it as a whole being. Because as we go through the process of doing that, we're breaking down the linear and fragmented mind control that we've been subject to. Okay, this is what the true education of the future has to be, is how to raise and nurture and educate a whole being to see reality in whole systems. So back to the original point of our conversation, what's law, what's equity, admiralty, ecclesiastical law, and so forth. It's a whole system. And if you only look at one piece, it's kind of like the 5 blind men who were given part of a elephant, and one says it's a rope because he's holding the tail, and one says it's a tree because he's got his arms around the leg, and so forth. You don't see the whole if you focus on only one of the parts. And our minds have been polarized, split, and fragmented to such a state that it's very difficult for most people to see the whole system, the whole dynamics. And this is really where we have to go with not just, of course, young newborns and so forth, but mature people, adults who operate in a very fragmented way and very mind-controlled way to be incapable of seeing the whole. So back to your question, why would the system do this? Because the system has always used a succession of steps to get to an ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal is what we're just on the precipice. We're beyond the precipice. We are in it now, which is the attempt to bind the genetics and the consciousness and the connection to source of living beings by a parasitic structure that is devoid of life force, but can feed off of the energy of those who are connected to it and do it in a free will universe by voluntary consent. Okay, I mean, that's what it gets down to it.
So basically, you're consenting to be a parasite.
No, you're consenting to be.
No, the other way around. You're consenting to be
to be lunch for the
yes,
parasite.
it's the other way around.
The
Yes, the lunch, the host for the parasite. Yeah. As I said it, I thought I've got that the wrong way around.
Yeah. So this is well, actually, I won't go there. So, but let me finish that line. So, in the collective law form of the planet, with all the different jurisdictions and elements, back to equity, understanding trust law and estate law is much more essential than understanding common law or law as a generic form. Natural law, distinguishing from common law. Yeah, common law has elements of natural law. Do unto others as you would have do unto yourself. Do no harm. Follow your commitments and contracts, things like that.
And based off case laws too. There's a lot of reference to previous cases.
Yeah, well, yeah, but case law is really a aberration of the original law form, and case law basically is basically it is, first of all, it's not law, it's precedent that then attorneys are taught to follow the precedent, and most attorneys are just code mechanics, and they have tools like this thing called LexisNexis, which they can research, and they have a case and it's got this subject, so they can find all the precedents of the what's called case law, and then they can quote it, and they say, well, according to Smith versus Jones, blah blah blah, and that was decided there, so then it applies here. That's not law. Okay. And so going into a courtroom and being very proficient in citing case law and statutes and codes is a complete misdirection, and is just designed to keep us stuck in the whirlpool and the vortex of sucking our energy. And I've known many people who think they're successful because they spent, I fought them for 12 years and I won that case. Yeah, well, great. So you had all your life force sucked out of you for 12 years and you think you won?
So is that why some of those who actually have had some success with their documents have quotes from, for instance, the Bible, because it's actually like a higher, or I don't know if you can call it higher, but or a different type of jurisdiction.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but again, they think by throwing that into a case situation and quoting the Bible fundamentally is the foundation of all law on this planet. Okay. And people would say, well, what about the East, and that we're not Judeo-Christian, blah, blah, blah. Well, once the East became integrated into the legal and monetary system and entered into international agreements and the UN and everything else, they agreed to accept the Bible as the law form. Okay. But is the Bible the law form because there is an ultimate divine being who gave that law, or is it a extremely complexified, multi-layered, structured document that includes everything we're talking about? It includes commerce and common law and equity and admiralty and maritime, and it also has a pathway to where to find the remedy. And let's not get into religion this time around, but so people do quote that, and it can be functional within a context, but more importantly is understanding how the law works, including the Bible, and where the law form of the planet comes from out of those documents, and where the remedy is. Because what we want is both remedy and moving to solution and moving to standing and capacity to have the capacity to put the gear into, let the clutch out, put the gear and get the engine moving to actually move the creational field of this planetary body in the direction of back to synchronization, alignment with universal law, which is, the common law principle of do no harm and co-create in an alignment with your agreements and your contracts and so forth. That is both common law and universal law. And, if I had about 10 weeks to sit here and describe every component of how the current world system is technically legally correct, and see when all these people were arguing and saying, well, it's fraud and this and that. No, it's actually not. And for as long as you're arguing it, they've got you by the cojones and they're controlling your life force. So let's just get on with the show by accepting it all, knowing how to unwind it and reverse it, walk back through it, and reintegrate ourselves into a whole being capacity to redirect and come together co-creatively with other beings of a like mind and like spirit to redirect our creator capacity to just recreate this creational field in honor of all life. I mean, that's where we're at. That's what we have to do.
Definitely.
So
I feel also it removes that battle of the divide and conquer, and where it's like it's to focus on what is it that we want. Don't argue, and it's like, well, they can play their little game. We don't need to stay in that. But when you spoke about the matrix, that there is like this image that keep popping up is that when I look at he steps out, Neo steps out of the matrix, and it's like a machinery working. It's all artificial. And I keep thinking there must be a different reality behind that, and that's where I want to play, because that when you're out of the matrix doesn't feel very joyful for me, just like with all these artificial slimy beings. As a metaphor.
Yeah, well, as a metaphor, the movie, basically in the movie, which as some say, and I agree with, it's not a movie, it's a documentary. You have
the actor Neo, he even said so.
Yeah.
After long after. Yeah.
Sure. But in the movie, when you remove the feeding tubes and the actual living flesh, the living body is in these vats, and everybody's in their own vat, and the feeding tubes and everything. You fall out of that, and you're able to be picked up by others who have managed to do that. Now you're on these ships that are flying around, but then are being attacked by all these creatures and mechanical things, blah, blah, blah. Well, isn't that really actually what's going on right now? Those of us who have moved to whatever extent away from the binding attachments to the matrix through the legal and the monetary system, our lives generally become more and more full of attacks and targets, and people who convert come in and they look like a friend and they become an Agent Smith and all the rest of it. And then you have unseen forces like those things that land on the ships and start drilling in and trying to get in. We are dealing with that, but but it's all being exposed. It's all coming more and more to the surface. It can't be hidden anymore. And that's what the apocalypse is, which is not a singular event. It's a continuum. And I refer to it as riding the waves of the apocalypse, because we're moving through a continuity or a continuum through the unveiling process of becoming more and more cognizant of what's real. Okay. And leaving behind that which is not real, which was always designed to be broken and to keep us in dysfunctionality, so we could never do what we're truly actually capable of doing. And we are creating the matrix. So all we have to do is, it's a simple formula, but it takes a lot of work, is sever the attachment, remove the presumption of consent. Because every time we do something, we get a bill, we sign a paper, we go to court, whatever, they're acting on the presumption of consent. Well, you're doing what indicates you have consented to being part of this, and therefore we have jurisdiction and we have attachment. Okay. Attachment is a very key point, as I keep repeating, but let's look again at law forms. And you mentioned the difference between legal and lawful. Okay. This goes back to, where does standing on the land come from? It came in the historical system from a sovereign who was a king crowned by, given a corona, the sun coronation of a crown by the Pope, who's going to control both sides of king and priest, or land and law. And so the sovereign, the crown king, says, I have the absolute authority over my land, but I can give you a grant of that land, and I require for that an oath of fealty, which is an oath of loyalty. And that's a reciprocal consideration in that contract. And an oath of loyalty establishes the crown sovereign as your liege lord. Okay. And liege is the root of the word allegiance, legislation, and legal, and all the rest of it. So it's an oath of allegiance to a purported sovereign who we've accepted as a superior authority, that we've accepted an oath of jurisdiction, attachment, and allegiance, and therefore all of the attaching codes and statutes under legislative enactments become part of our oath of fealty. So we have taken that oath of fealty, and so therefore we've given an oath of jurisdiction and bound ourselves to all those codes and statutes. Okay. Underlying all of that is a presumption of consent. So we have to negate the presumption of consent, and we have to do very specific steps to disconnect externally in the legal and the monetary sense, and internally in terms of our entire process on this creational field planetary body, and in other places where we took vows and oaths and so forth that still keep us bound energetically. Okay, so that's
so that's like past life stuff as well. So it's oaths and stuff we've taken in previous lives. Are you including that?
Yeah, absolutely. So
there's this judge. His name is Judge Teale. He is a whistleblower.
Yeah.
And said the first thing you do when you go into court is you say, I do not consent to this proceedings. And I object, and I demand to see who bonded me, so I know who to send the bill to if I get damaged.
Okay. And that's
four steps.
Yeah. And I've read his documents, and there's a lot of validity in most of what he says, but there are, again, things that he, as a judge, even though he's revealing a lot of the secrets, still hasn't gone past a certain point. So first of all, when you do the steps required to sever the attachments, remove the presumption of consent, and basically correct your status, you get to the point where you don't go to court. You don't have to, because anything that comes to you is like the Agent Smith who dives into Neo, and he's just, dealing with him with his little left pinky, because he doesn't have to extend any of his life force or his energy other than to address it in a very succinct way to settle the claim and close it. How do we do that? That gets back to estate law and understanding that all property on the planet is held in an estate. Okay. There are two types of estates in the system. It's the underlying estate, what I call the ancestral lineal or genetic estate, that is captured and abandoned, or abandoned and captured by claim and salvage in the beginning of our lives, and converted to a commercial construct, a franchise, and so forth. And that's the repository of all the substance and value that our life creates over the course of our life. On top of that is something called a decedent estate. That's the franchise. That's the debtor. That's what the IRS has the authority to tax, and the court has the authority to judge, and the commercial system has the authority to bill. But what they're doing when they do that is they're reaching in, because they're acting as the executor of the estate, because that's been abandoned. So they act as the executor, and the executor can use the principal as a collateral or an underlying guarantee of something that he wishes to do. he or it as the executor. That's what all these commercial instruments, all these debts are. They're security interests that are a debt, monetized debt against the underlying estate, which is the repository of value. So if I'm an apple farmer and I take my harvest of the year and I put it into the barn and I have 1,000 apples, I can issue 1,000 barn receipts or warehouse receipts and give them away or spend them. I can go spend them and get a chicken and a beer and whatever, and whoever gets that instrument, because it's a secured interest against what's in my vault or the barn. And the guy who now receives that instrument can pay it to the next guy, or he can come and eat the apple. When he comes, he retires that instrument, gets the substance, and he eats it and reduces the value that's held in the repository. Well, we do the same thing. We're creating value every single moment of our life. Okay, but we have abandoned the estate. We have no capacity or standing to claim anything, and therefore we're subject to all the codified legal liege attachment rules of our sovereign, which is the corporation and the crown and the Vatican and whoever's behind those.
What is the first step in severing, cutting yourself free from the? You said the assumption of consent, but what is the first step out of? Is that the birth certificate?
Not necessarily. I mean, that's part of it. And again, it's a whole system. Okay. What we have constructed is a whole system dealing with every component, dealing with the underlying estate, dealing with the decedent estate. And actually, by definition, just to touch on this, the word decedent in the law dictionary means dying. So we're operating a decedent estate, and for as long as we're doing so, we're in this process of dying. Okay. Why? Because every piece of paper attached to us is sucking our life force, and it's withering the living substance of our embodiment to the point to, at a certain point, we actually expire. Okay. So we are operating a decedent estate as a franchise in commerce that is monetizing through public policy that was established on March 9th, when the Emergency Banking Relief Act was passed, and Proclamation 2040 that extended the bank holiday from 3 days before 2039 indefinitely. So we've been in technically a bank holiday under emergency banking rules since 1933. That created then the global construct, the global corporation, and everything we've talked about already. But the settlement of that global bankruptcy basically is the dissolution of that polarization between death and dying and the living estate. And so on an individual level, the work that I've done for 3 decades, and we've done in PanTerra and GEMSTONE for 1 decade, is to perfect an integrated process of status correction to do all those steps. So to answer your question, it's not just the birth certificate. Birth certificate is a key part, but what it is understanding equity and how to accept that birth account and how to accept the social security or social insurance account that has underwritten the vessel and all the monetized debt, and how to access the reversionary or remainder interest that is still in the underlying estate. And what's about to happen on a global scale or planetary scale is that the final dissolution of that bankrupt estate is essentially about to release all of the estates of all the living beings on the planet. How that will unfold over time. Will it be that we're going to wake up next week and there's going to be an announcement, hey, everybody, all your debt is canceled? No, it's not going to happen that way, because it's all that.
This is all drats.
Yeah, but it can and will happen very quickly, and that's.
So what you're talking about is returning these revisionary interests to the living soul
beneficiary. Yeah. Okay.
So
in the underlying estate, the beneficiary is a living being, a living beneficiary. That's what's called a Sesta KV, the living beneficiary. You guys, I'm sure, familiar with the Sesta KV Act of 1666. And that was all about a Sesta KV, meaning the living beneficiary title holder who holds the landed estate and all things attached to that estate, has gone to sea, has been lost, presumed dead. We must now pronounce dead after 7 years so that we can settle that estate, move it on to the next living beneficiary and other estate holders on that title estate. People have a estate in life and so forth. So in the decedent estate, we are a limited use holder or a usufruct of the beneficial rights of that decedent estate, but we have no access to what's underneath that, the living estate, the living beneficiaries. So correction.
So this correction, does that mean that we automatically become back as living beings, or
we've always been living beings?
Well, I mean, I know we've always been a living being, but you know, in the eyes of the commerce and law, does it automatically rescind it? Because we're still actually, you know, got a birth certificate. We haven't rescinded. We shouldn't say rescinded. You already said that puts you back into it, but we're still attached to that birth certificate as a dead being.
Well, we do rescind the signatures that we originally gave, because that was the nexus point or the connector point between living and the dead is our signature. That's why they always want you to get your signature.
Yeah.
You have the power to accept an instrument. You have the power to rescind a signature. When you do that, you revoke a power of attorney that you've given to another party, and that will terminate and close the contract. But because you created something in the form of the monetized debt, if there are attached claims or contingent claims or liabilities to that estate, those have to be settled. Okay. So because we're going to honor everything. Where will they be settled out of? They'll be settled out of the much larger underlying estate that we will reclaim, and we claim our life force, we claim our body, we claim our DNA, and we do numerous things with different steps and going through the layers of it. It's not that we return to being a living being. We are a living being. We just take the overlay off, you know.
But yeah, no, I guess what I'm trying to say is we still need to do all of that, even though the...
we have to walk the path. We can't, energetically, we cannot just say, well, you know, I'm a free being. You have no claim on me. Well, they do, contractually and even universally.
Yeah, so that's still there, even though okay. That's what I was trying to get clarity on.
Let's go back to the birth certificate. Again, that was issued with your name and your body, but because you haven't made any claim to either your name or your body, it's presumed that you are in consent.
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. So where did trusts and that come into this? Is that part of the reclaiming?
Yes and no. Just understanding trust law is a part of equity, but trusts essentially emerge out of an estate. Okay, an estate has the property. If you, one who has control over the estate, chooses to take some component of property, put it into a trust form, what is being done in the trust form is you're splitting the title. Okay, so trust in essence is a three-way relationship between property that's put in trust and the splitting of title, creating a legal title holder known as a trustee and a beneficiary title holder known as the beneficiary or the equity holder. Okay, so there's a lot of danger in trusts. There's a lot of good things in trusts that you can do if you know what you're doing with them. A lot of people are out there doing trusts that they don't know or understand. But the key thing to understand is that everything that's been created in that birth certificate, capital letter name, your utility bill, tax bill, your driver's license account, your this, that, and the other, court order, those are all trusts. Trusts are being created every single day because it's splitting title, and technically we always are the beneficiary if it's coming out of our estate. But because we've accepted the benefits of the decedent estate, we are separated like by a glass wall from the substance of that equitable interest and the beneficial rights. We've let those go for temporary and partial beneficial use, and that's where the usufruct comes in. We're the creator, but we have given by license and contract the control of the title. We're given a limited beneficial use. I don't own, if I'm still a bonded surety, I don't own this house, I don't own the car out there, I don't own this shirt, I don't own this body, but I'm given beneficial limited use of it. That's usufruct, where the title is still held by the executor of the master estate. And so then all of the bureaucratic officers and agents are given the license authority to create public funds and attach monetized debt to my decedent estate, and I stand as the debt servicer and the surety. So, and every time that happens, a trust is formed. And every time the trust is formed, if I walk into court and they say, are you John Henry Doe? And I say, yes, I am. I've just accepted the trustee position of that trust that just got expressed, that holds the charge and the penalty underlying that charge in a trust. Now I've accepted the role of trustee, and because that's legal title holder, the legal title holder is also responsible for the liabilities. Okay, so I must pay the liability. If I don't, I'm in breach, or I'm in contempt, or whatever else is going to come out of that.
There are many ways we unknowingly are treated as slaves in today's society. The deep state agenda, which is behind government, states, and systems, want to remove all freedom as they thrive on our energy and powers. Footsteps for Freedom: How We Have Been Tricked to Slavery is an extensive book in which we explore some of the traps and ways we are hijacked, deceived, spellcast, and programmed to stay in the matrix. Get it for free on holyland.me/freedom book. That is WHOLYLAND.me/FREEDOMBOOK.
I'm curious around when you say all this coming out now with the bankruptcy and all these, the banks and all of that, and that we might have all our debts removed and all of that. Is this what people talk about when they talk about Nesara and GEMSTONE, or is that just one of those things to distract us and keep us passive for not taking action? What do you know about the Nesara GEMSTONE thing?
Quite a bit. It's really yes to both of your questions on both sides. Yes, there's validity to it, and yes, it's a rabbit trail or a distraction. And there are a tremendous amount of belief systems around all of this in terms of what is really happening with the currency reset and individual currencies that people expect to be making them lots of gazillions of dollars, Nesara, GEMSTONE, and all of that, quantum financial systems, all of that. It is true that there was something called Nesara in the late 80s that was signed into as an act that was supposed to be an economic stabilization and recovery act. It happened at the same time other things were happening. So you have to, what I've spent a huge amount of time studying and living through for 30 years, because I started this work in late 80s, 89, 90, 91. And we had the mixed blessing and curse to be directly linked to and get involved in many of those situations and events that go back 25, 30 years that in themselves sat upon things that happened the previous 25 to 40 years from the 1950s, 1960s. So we have actually lived through and interacted with a tremendous amount of these things, as opposed to people who, quote unquote, woke up. And it's a relative, statement to say, well, I woke up, last year and I now know all these things. Well, many people, yes, are waking up, but the depth of their knowledge and understanding is pretty superficial still. And that too, we intend to assist in educating through media and education and so forth. But, I have the vantage point of living through 30 years of it, as well as walking through the steps of these layers of the law process and everything we've talked about last time and this time. So there were several things. Was the Nesara Act. There was something called the farm claims. Have you ever heard of the farm claims?
Nope.
In the US? That started in the 1970s. Once everything was set in place in 1933 and went forward, then there was this massive restructuring of everything, all of the congressional processes and the offices and the acts, and basically set up what we now call the deep state. And then a systematic process from the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and onward of basically decade to decade doing different things to capture different asset bodies or sectors of the global estate. Land, the medical industry, the farming industry, the all the different major sectors of what we call components of a whole economy. So the capturing of farmland and the food production and the seeds was paramount to control the world. You control the land, you control the farms, the food, and the seeds, then you control the people.
Well, we see that with Bill Gates, don't we?
We're seeing that right now with him buying what the biggest landowner in the US or something now, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, put it this way: his franchise and his corporations are, all of which are being liquidated, and those are, basically illicit prize and booty from treasonous acts of war. They will be removed. So all Bill is going to end up with is a nice length of rope somewhere very soon, but that's a different story.
He got a huge bill.
That's right. The bill has been delivered and the door is open to the gates of hell and he's going through it. But anyway, so the farm claims, long story made short, emerged from the 70s when farmers were being raked over and massive amounts of farmland was being foreclosed and so forth. And by the late 80s, they had proven it and taken all the way up to the Supreme Court. And basically a similar kind of thing that came through the court as opposed to Congress with Nesara established that all Americans were due damages for what damage not only to the farmers, but basically everybody. And certain things happened in the early 90s where people for a short period were given the opportunity to submit some data and get their farm claim that was going to be part of the settlement. So there were Nesara type structures settled to remove the debt and do other things. There was farm claims to give essentially money back to the people. There were other programs that happened in the 90s that people call prosperity programs that were also going to give people large amounts of money. Then there was the currency conversion things that happened. All of these were set up as mechanisms to disperse and disseminate the new monetary issue that would come out of a new solvent system. So everything that's happened has been a war or a battle to get to the final point of collapsing the deep state, taking control of the military, and setting things up so that the mechanism of debt monetization basically would be collapsed, so that we would no longer be in one encapsulating global corporation with a whole lot of subdivisions, nation states down to individual franchises, and basically settle the claims and the estate. Now, that phrase, to settle everything, to liquidate the bankrupt corporation, behind that is a vast amount of detail that we don't have time to go into. Suffice it to say, everything that was required to do that is now done. And the things that many have been waiting for since the stolen election in November, and Trump seemingly leaving office and Biden seemingly being in office and so forth. Let's just say there's been a lot of I's needing to be dotted and T's needing to be crossed to get to a final point. But we're already operating in a new monetary system. So all of the issue that's out there in the form of circulating currency as monetized debt has to be remonetized in the new system, has to be set up in a manner by which solvency and liquidity can be dispersed on a global scale, so that it can then start being applied to do what money is supposed to do, which is a mechanism to convert a unit of measure that we call a dollar or whatever into kinetic force, which means energy that moves towards the creation of something, to take raw materials and labor and whatever else and create value. Okay, I mean, that's all monetary function is supposed to be, which is what I call a parity system based on the word par. A unit of measure is on par with a unit of value, that you monetize actual value. So if you have the 1,000 apples in the barn, you should issue 1,000 warehouse or barn receipts corresponding to a item of value on a par. But if you issue 2,000 apple receipts and you only have 1,000 apples, you're hoping and praying that at least 1,000 don't come to try and, demand the delivery of the substance, and that it just keeps circulating. Okay. Well, if you do that, you own the barn and you own everything else in the system to make it legally prohibited from coming and demanding the substance of the apple. Then you can put out 2,000, 10,000, 20 million warehouse receipts and say, well, it's the apple. The apple is some form of substance, but it's not on par. Okay. And this is what mortgages and consumer debt and everything in the monetary system through fractionalization and derivatives and everything. But all of that had to be taken into account. All liabilities had to be settled and closed, and set up a new system where the underlying value and substance would effectively be solvent and not start recreating the old problem of the debt system. So it's taken a massive amount of time, decades, to get into a position to get control of that, and then do the things that happened in the last 4 years and prepare for where we're at now.
Can I ask you about this? Does that have to do with the collateral accounts and these trusts?
Yeah, global collateral accounts, and yeah, they're all related, and that has to do with the vast amount of true intrinsic value that is accumulated on this planet for thousands of years, that is still retained and now controlled on a planetary basis. A lot of the value has been exported off of the planet, and probably will not come back, but there is enough substance in those deep and wide trust and collateral accounts and non-monetized intrinsically valued assets like gold and otherwise that are what underwrites the new system. A lot of people think in terms of, well, there's money, it's in the bank, I have a checking account, it says I have $1,000, so there's money and I can go write a check against it. And they ask the question based on that very limited thinking, well, where's all the money coming from? It's not a matter where's the money coming from. The money that has existed has to be settled and closed in the settling of a bankrupt estate. And all the substance, the value, and the assets have to be moved into the new system and remonetized with substance that underwrites it, which is the intrinsic value and assets of every country on the planet, separate from the central bank system, which is going to go away. It's going to be reconstituted as a treasury system and so forth. And, and then what's going to denominate in essentially a solvent and parity basis, a unit, all the units of measure, which is all the dollars and pounds and pesos, and a unit of value. From that point, what we are now being handed is essentially the inheritance, becoming living beneficiaries. But more importantly, where's the corresponding responsibility? How do we know how to then step into that as the new masters on the planet? Is the human population ready to be masters of their own destiny and start actually directing what we're about to be stepping into? The answer is decidedly no. So there are enough, I believe, people on the planet who are not the ones who are being let's say liquidated along with the liabilities, who have always been aligned or now are aligning or will commit to align with the new system, the new principles. Those who are not so far corrupt that they're going to say, okay, got my hands wet there, got my feet dirty, but okay, let's make amends, clean up. Now we have a large architecture that's been operating as a banking and monetary system. It's still there and intact. We're just taking the controllers out of it and directing the people who have the ability to start functioning and directing it as a system that supports life, and we can start building and cleaning up the mess, which is what we have to do. And then educate people and the new generations how to actually grow up in a solvent system and not a mind-controlled program system, to educate the future to inherit it.
Yeah, so education actually, in some ways, is really the one of the biggest keys, isn't it? Is to get people to be able to think again and creatively think.
What a concept.
Yeah, whoa, you can actually think. Whoa, make your own decisions.
And then one of the big problems with that is that we have not been trained to like that in school, or even by parents and grandparents and stuff, because the system has been going for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
well, we encounter that every single day. We've had hundreds and hundreds, actually a couple thousand people come through the PanTerra Society, start being educated and stepping into an arena where they can start breaking down the programming and so forth. And out of right now, 2,200 people who have signed up to be members, we only have 350 left, because we started raising the bar and saying that those who remain as members of PanTerra have to commit to our principles and our intention, which is to be part of rebuilding, cleaning up, and so forth, and building a new world. And many attacked us, became agents. They changed from the Easter Bunny to Agent Smiths, You know, they were warm and fuzzy when they showed up, and they were nasty when when we kicked them out.
Mhm.
And then those who have stayed, every day we encounter matrix thinking, you know, many things. Everything is hardwired to that. Oh, we have the ability to create projects. Okay, we can develop this land and grow nourishing food. Well, you know, where's the profit margin, and where's the blah 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 and this and that, and thinking in terms of how we've been programmed, that everything is in a competitive musical chairs reality. If I don't get mine first, then I may not get it. So then I have to compete, and then compete leads to lie and cheat, and then, you know, all the rest of it. How do we reprogram ourselves? Because we need to have an operating system from matrix thinking to living thinking.
But maybe I think that there's a big group of people like myself who are more the star seeds and beings that have worked so hard my whole life to try to figure out this game, but it never made sense. I never liked competition. I even as a kid, I stood there and looked and I was like, why are people so weird and mean? And it's like, I never could play the game, and I never got into that money ties. It's like, oh, I need to be successful and make a lot of money. It just never resonated with me. And I know there's a lot of us out here, and I know a lot of big bunch of our audiences have struggled a lot, but because it doesn't fit with who we really are, because all we want is to, you know, be part of creating a better world and, you know, be peace and heal. So it's been a challenge for a lot of us to actually play the game where we are so-called successful within the matrix.
Mm-hmm. Well, because what you're describing is the same as the four of you, and same as me, same as my wife Andrea, and the current members. They may have matrix thinking that we have to struggle with, but in the essence and the being, they are all aligned with the principles and the intentions and the commitment as you're discussing and describing. And universally with all of those individuals, I know it's a certainty that we all lived our lives basically experiencing what's going on. Why am I in this reality? Who are these people that are supposed to be my family or my friends or my teachers or my, you know, fellow workers or whatever, who don't see reality the way I do, don't experience that this is fundamentally wrong, this reality that we're in. They seem to all be, you know, going along with the program, you know. And actually up until several years ago, 5 years, or really like 10 years ago, for the most part, at least in Western countries where you had the opportunities, the program seemed to be working pretty good. You know, I can get a house with a mortgage and a car with a car payment and this and that, and I have a nice, you know, situation. But then it started collapsing because the bill was coming due, and the matrix masters had, you know, and that was always in the timeline and the program agenda, to begin to collapse it, to start doing the harvesting. And but we all grew up for the last whatever 30 to 80 years, those who actually, you call them star seeds, or just simply those who came here a long time ago to first take on the clothing of the realm, to entangle ourselves, to understand the depth and the detail of this entrapment and entanglement system, and then wake ourselves up in this lifetime as an apex incarnation. And apex means simply that outside of linear time, this incarnation has a quantum relationship to all lifetimes that we've taken on, to transmute and transform and redirect it and heal ourselves, and by so doing, healing the planet. So none of us could ever be successful in the matrix.
Yeah.
Never. Some tried who did go into business or professions or whatever. A lot said, well, screw that. I'm not even going to do that. Like you said, I'm not going to play the game. And you got by. But inevitably, somebody turned into an agent of the Matrix, or just a vicious dog or a barking demon or whatever it was, just to nip at us and attack us or whatever, because at some level we have this thing on our head. We're marked in the right sense of it, not the mark of the beast, but the possessed part of the Matrix through the human automatonic organic robots would know, oh yeah, it's like the movie They Live. There's one of them there. He can see me. So, so our lives have been pretty not so fun in a lot of ways. And many have paid some very serious price. Some have paid the ultimate price in terms of losing their life, trying to do what was right. But now we're at the point where we're actually living in two worlds. And so what we're talking about in terms of status correction or biological healing or trauma and karmic healing and all the rest of it is disentangling ourselves, walking ourselves backwards out of the Matrix the way we walked into it. And the more we do that, the more who we are comes into these bodies. The only way out is in, and the more capacity we have. So the legal and lawful process of status correction or monetary disentanglement or removing presumption of consent and all that we've talked about are steps to doing that. And now we have reached a activation point where true removal of the inhibitors, both taken on by ourselves and externally attached, is going to accelerate at an exponential level. So we're going to start going into the parabolic curve where time collapses and consciousness or embodied capacity increases exponentially in inverse ratio. And that's going to start creating a quantum shift. And so we can see who we are in that regard as a catapult force. Okay. Because a catapult, you take it at a neutral point and you pull it back, and you have stored energy by pulling it back, tying it down. And of course, as an engine of war, you put a big rock or a bomb on it and go like that. But we're not at war. We're going to peace. And what's coming out of us in that catapult force is our true being and our essence and our capacity to come together and co-create and actually use that stored energy, which we could call inheritance or the meek inheriting the earth. But it's like we're really reclaiming our own universal and genetic and ancestral estate. And as we take control over it and we remove the attachments, the expansion of our being and capacity is like a catapult that's released, that's going to quantumly shift us and carry us through that frequency fence that has kept us locked in.
Yeah, and I think the key there as well is co-creation, isn't it? We've certainly found working together that we've unwound so quickly this last year working together, because we can see each other's shadows, we can help each other out when we drop back into the Matrix and go, did you really mean that? Just so yeah, it's been certainly for us, it's been fantastic working together to
and it's
just go deeper.
It's interesting you're saying about the collapsing of time, because it's been we have had many conversations about this the last few weeks in particular, where it like this whole year have really felt like that parallel realities, as you were, or dimensions or whatever, where it becomes more and more surreal. The Matrix becomes, it's so weird, so you can't even grasp it. And the time is really, really speeding up. And it's like, what happened to this month again? And you blink and you can really feel the acceleration of the time. And so I actually said this a few days ago, and it's just like, it's going to collapse all of a sudden. And then everything is like, boom, comes into alignment and fall into place, or however we want to express it.
Sure. Well, consider a different angle of looking at that time is not collapsing, we're expanding. And because what is actually what we call time, or the temporal dimension, if we consider that in our whole being, we are multidimensional beings. And so when we speak of genetics, that integrating more and more of the what would seem like intangible or non-biological genetic matrices in the true sense of the word, which is the mater, the word matrix comes from mater, which is materia, which is the mother and all that. We've taken on the mother substance of the planetary body, but we have ethereal bodies and other dimensional levels, all of which is our whole genetic capacity. And each strand, if you will, as a metaphor of a genetic strand, is our conscious capacity to be integrated and aware in another dimension. So if we came into this hologram as a densifying system and squeeze those dimensions into more and more density, into a three-dimensional biological body that only has two strands and a bunch of junk, so-called junk in the rest of our cells, because that's the fragmentation of our quantum consciousness. And as it's squeezed, if you take a balloon or a marshmallow and you squeeze it, what happens? It pops out the two sides. So what if by squeezing our consciousness from being multidimensional into a three-dimensional two-strand DNA skin suit body, collapsed or compressed our consciousness to that where it extended backwards and forwards, and we started perceiving that as linear time, past, present, and future? And what if in this current now that we've been existing as a globally dispersed technological age, we have been directed and entrained to create a binary codified computerized system that we attach our genetic or a biological living substance to, and it's been monetized as a control mechanism. And in order to manage it and put us into complete control, it had to be systematized in a silicon-based consciousness that we call binary coded computer systems. So what if we created that as a nonlinear process of our own entrapment in time? And so what we call this AI consciousness, which wants to devour us and control us perpetually, eternally, is nothing more than what we create as a timeline consequence of what we collectively created on this planet in this last, say, 100 to 300 years, projected into the future. But because time and space are intertwined, it has a curvature. So it's coming back from the future into the past, propelling us to go from a non-computerized system to build the AI computerized system, so that in the future, it would then curve back in the past. And we're in this quantum loop, or this perpetual time loop that we've created. Okay. So as we expand into our awareness and integrate, remove the entanglements of religion and belief systems and legal and monetary attachments and bondage and everything, more of who we are is coming online in the true technology, which is who we are as spirit and universal beings. And as we do that, the release is allowing those dimensions to come back on time. We're literally mutating and healing this body to become a conduit of who we really are. And as we're doing that, we're collapsing time. And the AI is losing its grip on ourselves because we're basically disconnecting by honoring it as a conscious thing that we created. It's like Frankenstein, my monster lives, and it has become the beast of the matrix, and the beast of the matrix is the global computerized binary codified system that we voluntarily attached ourselves to, and we worked together to create. And so we're uncreating it.
It's interesting. Okay. Our 14-year-old son just described the Frankensteins, like we created the Frankenstein, and then like he just explained exactly that. That's quite interesting. Yeah,
because younger people are coming into a less compressed hologram, and they have more access to it. Okay. And there's a lot of beings incarnating right now with way more capacity than we've been able to bring online. We have it. We're just the the grunt soldiers who had to take on the the front line and basically beat up and eat shit for millions of eons of time. But that's because of who we really are. We have the ability to come into systems and bust them up. And we're not just doing it for this planet. So you use the word starseed. So, and a lot of that is distorted in New Age stuff. But in actuality, we're just the avatar projected by a universe or a galaxy or a star or whatever, some larger consciousness that has already gone through creational fields of vast levels and understands how creation really works. And so understanding creation, we could come into the system, and basically we came in upside down and ass backwards, and we fragmented ourselves. And we hardwired a fragment of the system in reverse to our genetics, and we took on the clothing of the realm because we knew that at this time we would be able to wake up and heal ourselves and basically shift it and essentially disassemble it. So that's real status correction.
That is real status correction. Yes. I've been waiting for thousands of lifetimes to hear this. So where are we heading in the future with this? It's like we have got a little sneak peek into all of this with the Kingdom of David and things. So
I gave you guys a sneak preview of something that we have been building with this man whose name is David Joel of the House of Weems, WEEMS. And I met David and his wife and son and a few members of his team about 26 months ago, basically February of 2019. And David comes from an ancestral lineage that is absolutely unique on the planet. He did not know that, and he wasn't told that in his young years. In fact, he was like 50 years old before he started being told by certain events that happened, which I'm not going to go into here. But basically, that was, the mid-90s. He started getting a little tap on the head. And it took him another 12 years to about 2005, 2006, when it really opened up. And since that time, for the last 15 years, he has reinstituted what's called the Kingdom of David. So his ancestral lineage is an unbroken chain of documented father to son. Of course, we know that in the Matrix, ancestral lineage is patrilineal. And so his family line goes back documented 124 generations, which is mathematically impossible, astronomical. And his original, or obviously that 124th grandfather had a father and a grandfather, but going just to that point, that was what biblically and historically is known as King David. And then the son Solomon, and then what was documented or reported in the Bible of Solomon's sons, and where it went from there until coming into quasi-modern historical records. The family moved from the Middle Eastern area, Jerusalem, Judea, and so forth, and ended up becoming the first kings of Ireland and Scotland and Argyll, which was part of, you guys know probably better than many.
It was fascinating to me reading the ancestral line.
Yeah,
because I'm very familiar with quite a few of the areas. So
yeah, and his ancestors were Shakespearean, historical figures, Macbeth and other, Richard and so forth. So, and it's all documented. And in fact, the name Weems comes from a Scottish name spelled Wemyss, which in Gaelic means the caves. And there are caves known as the Weems Caves, and there's Weems Castle, and there's many of the name Weems places throughout Scotland and other places in those islands where you guys live, named after the family. And those were the caves which the original records brought from Judea to Ireland, Scotland, and so forth, where they were stored. So those records are extant, they exist, and they're preserved and so forth. And once he woke up to who he was, or was, tapped on the head, say, hey, guess what? You're not who you think you are, or you're a lot more than you think you are. His background was biblical and Christian in terms of his upbringing, and very much corporate. And he had, once he came to understand his duty and responsibility in history, he established his teams, and he, because his background is in law and corporate business and international business and so forth, he created what he thought at that time was the best way to reinstitute the law form and the jurisdiction as a kingdom, with what is stated in the biblical text as that there will be a new King David, essentially at the end of time. Okay, we just talked about time. Is the end of time an apocalyptic collapse through Armageddon? No, well, that's their script of what they wanted to do in their overlay. We are ending time. We're resolving karma. We are reintegrating, as we've been talking about. So, but we've been locked in this matrix, in this Babylonian system based on king and priest. The king holds all the land and holds the court, but in the court is the priest. This goes back to Sumerian texts. One of the primary things if you've ever studied the Sumerian text and so forth, is something called a me, M-E. And these were decrees of the gods, the supposed gods, Anu and Marduk and so forth. And they brought forth all of these iconic structures of king and priest. The first thing that was created was the priesthood, and then the scepter and the crown and various things. If you do a search, Sumerian me, capital M, capital E, and go to Wikipedia, you'll see a list of all the me's, okay, which are decrees. Where did they come from? Who are the Sumerians? Well, the Sumerians brought law and agriculture and money and political structure and everything. Well, they didn't just show up and say, oh, we're these beneficent beings and we're just going to give you all these great things. No, they brought the hologram to take control of the construct and create the matrix and the Babylonian priesthood and the money magic system to fulfill their intention, which was to own and control all land, flesh, and souls, and the substance of this creational field called planet Earth. Okay, they were reptilian, draconian, Anunnaki, Syrian, Orion, blah, 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 and all the rest of that. And they came in with this quantum hole holographic insert, and they brought it in, they started creating kingship and priestcraft. And then they brought in the symbols and the numerics and the alphabet and the alphanumeric constructs to mind control and creating religions and everything that we're stuck in at this time. So, as David, from his Christian and biblical basis, understood from that and within that basis that he was the foretold King David to reinstitute this kingdom called the Kingdom of David, he did it on the basis of what he knew and understood 10 to 15 years ago. 2 years and 2 months ago, we were brought together and we had a meeting for just about a day and a half. And I told him what was going on with me and what was happening with PanTerra and other things that were in motion at that time, and discussed law and so forth. and had a good connection, and that's where we left it. And then about 6 months, 5 months later, we got back together here in California. And we spent quite a lot of time really unwinding and really having a meeting of the minds, and my inputting to him all of my knowledge and research and understanding of things that he had not been exposed to. A lot of the esoterics, a lot of the energetics, a lot of the biology and genetics, as well as the law and equity and so forth. And essentially in the last 2 years, we have worked together to synergize and integrate both sides of it, and essentially transmute the old construct of the king and the priest and reconfigure what he had laid the foundation for, a kingdom. And one day I woke up, I don't know, 8-10 months ago, and clearly saw that, oh, the word David also had the word Davida in it, of the life, or D apostrophe VIDA. And so this is not a kingdom of a king, as in the old structure. It's a kingdom of life, and a kingdom in which the law and the embodiment of the law is removed from the priest, whether that's a priest of churches and temples, or a priest of medicine, or a priest of politics. All these systems that we have, they're all priestcraft. They're all designed. The priests of the IRS, the priests of the tax system, the priests of the bureaucracy. Everything is designed as hierarchical structure based on Sumerian priestcraft, in which the priest controls the temple and the temple controls the substance of what's inside of it. The real temple is this living temple. We are the temple. If you go to Egypt, you see along the Nile, there were 7 principal temples that were constructed to be the initiatory phases by which an initiate would become a master, mastering both sides of the hologram to control the corpus or the civil body in the middle. And there were 7 of them, which was walking through the 7 centers with the 7 chakras or the 7 frequencies to rise above the polarized construct of containment to contain the masses. Okay, so Solomon's temple is nothing more than a externalized construct of the temple, of which we are learning or remembering that we are the embodied being in the real living temple. Okay, so it's got nothing to do with priests or temples or religion or any of those things that most would initially think, oh, they're just creating a new religion, and Ken wants to be the high priest and David gets to be the king, and that's not it at all. But it's using the mirror reflection of the template of life that they mirrored, as we talked about last time, and rearranging it back to alignment and disentanglement with the universal template of what this temple was originally designed to be, that got corrupted, adulterated, and co-opted to become a feeding trough for the parasite that we created and came back around to bite us in the ass. So
Isn't
we're
it
having
also the whole Solomon temple and that it's been also in a way overtaken by the Moloch and everything. So it just explains that mirror effect, and that it's like, again, the hijacking of or bringing into a matrix form also these names and to perceive their agenda, bring out their ministers everywhere.
Again, it's funny on the timing, isn't it? Because I've been reading all about the missing lands and all the connections with sort of going way back to sort of the many eons, and sort of more of what the true story and the true meaning is. And I sort of just sort of been working on that for the last 2 or 3 weeks, because it was just something that's really sort of called me. And then last weekend got to read your new website, and it was like, I could just see all that. It was just so wonderful to read it and see that you're really tapping in to honor what was really there, rather than what's got corrupted over the eons. It's,
Right.
I was blown away by it. It was just beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. And for everybody listening or watching, by the time this plays in a week or 2 weeks, we will be just on the verge of launching that site. We're not going to give the name of the site. As soon as it's published and available, it will, you guys can put it on your website, and we'll put it many other places for people to find it. And basically, it embodies and integrates everything that we've talked about, all of the work that I've done for 30 years and all of the work that David did in his journey. And surprisingly, to both of us in a lot of ways, we were so well synchronized and so well suited to do the work that we're doing now together, to basically unwind this polarized field of separation. And and like you were saying, Tora, in studying law and esoteric systems, words and etymology and the roots of words, and even letters and letter number correspondences, all these things are part of the construct and the mind control of that whole holographic insert that came into this creational field, that we then started both falling unconscious to our true who we are, as well as aligning with and allowing ourselves to redirect our creator capacity into creating this matrix as our own self-created prism that we have agreed to. So there's vast amount of clues in the language, in the words, in the etymology, which means the root of the words, and also in the Bible if it's a decoded, truly unwound esoteric system, there is vast amount of very precise components that do contain the remedy of our way out of the matrix. But at the surface is a absolute system of mind control and bondage, re-lig to bind and bond again through the priests and the temples and the money systems. And of course, by the time we got to Rome, the temples were the banks. And the banks, or the temples as the banks, were on a street called Janus Street. And the god Janus in Roman mythology was the god of war and peace. And when the doors were open, Rome was at war. So if these banks that we go to continually think that we're getting what we need to build a house or create a beautiful farm or feed everybody on the planet, if we walk through that open door, we're walking into a Roman temple of war. So we're going into martial entanglement, martial law, and all the rest of it. When the doors of the Janus temple were closed, Rome was at peace. But when these banks close their doors, they go into the night creep, the midnight creep of going under the underworld, the netherland, of going into the subterranean level of the journey of the sun, on the ecliptic, when the sun is on the underneath, it's in the nether worlds, the underworld, where Osiris, the god of death, is standing there with his scales of justice to weigh your heart against a feather to see if you qualify to be resurrected into their false matrix. It's all there. Okay, so so I've been not studying the Bible, but I've been penetrating it for most of the last 50 years. I was born in a Jewish family. We did not go through the Jewish indoctrination process. The most Jewish thing I did was eat lox and bagels twice a week. My father had a Jewish deli restaurant, and, to me, being a Jew was eating lox and bagels and having a good time, So I wasn't indoctrinated in a Christian or Catholic thinking. I wasn't really indoctrinated into the Jewish thinking, but I studied religion for 50 plus years, and I wanted to get to the core and the root. And I have found that the Bible does have keys to open up if we know how to put the right key into the right lock. And it has commerce, it has equity, and has all these things. So meeting David and his lineage and understanding, as I knew what the line of the king and the line of the priest, when we came together, it just unwound and unveiled over the last 2 years. And now what we've done, what you looked at that website, which we're about to publish, is taking what we did privately in PanTerra in terms of creating our law form, jurisdiction, and court, and treasury, and so forth, is the fundamental of establishing a law form and a jurisdiction and the court system to re-embody the law in the people, so that no longer there's a priestcraft that binds us to their codes and statutes and their legal allegiance attachments because we accepted the benefits of the contracts. But walking out of that, severing those contracts, and coming into our wholeness and coming co-creatively together to understand that we are the law on this planet. And that law fundamentally is not 100 million codes and statutes, and it's not even negative admonishments like the 10 commandments that say you shall not, blah, blah, blah. It's what honors life and comes together in a unified field or a universe of co-creation in which we agree that we will honor all life and all life forms and so forth, and we will reinstitute a kingdom of life in which all life is honored.
So beautiful. I cried through the whole first document because it just went straight into my heart, and it's like, oh my God. Oh, thank you, God, more likely. It was really, it was profound. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I spent the whole of Friday afternoon and the good part of Saturday morning reading through the website, and then the PanTerra master plan as well. And yeah, like Tora, I was frequently in tears. It was just, and just that sort of like, somebody gets it, you know, somebody else gets it. Yeah, it was just fabulous to read what you and it's just so beautiful as well. I mean, the imagery you put with it is just yeah, just gorgeous. It just totally resonated with me.
Good.
So you've got all my paperwork. I've already done all my forms.
Okay.
I've just spent 3 days deep diving into all your stuff.
Okay, good.
So
for those,
go
ahead. No, you go
I just
ahead.
want to say it truly resonates with me as well when I read through the website and what you've created together with Joel and
David Joel.
David Joel, that's right. And so what if we can we lift the lid off what people can when the website is out, what is it that it will be say good for? What can people expect to in terms of solution? As you said, you're thinking solution oriented. So
sure. Well, the foundation, the rock upon which this kingdom and society is established is David with his historical, ancestral, and biblical authority. And what I said earlier, that all nation states on the planet have established by hundreds and thousands of years of agreement that the Bible is the foundational law form upon which this global civilization has been founded. And in that law form, it says there will be a new King David and a reinstitution of that kingdom at the end of time, essentially. And it says that he will be a king over the nations. but a prince amongst the people. So in other words, he is a man. He is equal in standing as a living being, as a man, as I am, as you are, as a woman is, without any hierarchy or polarization, no separation of the masculine and feminine. And let me come back to that. Let me say that going back to the Temple of Solomon. Well, the word Solomon, for anybody who studies language or esoteric systems, we know that it means soul and moon, mon, soul, o, moon, sun and moon, which is the masculine and the feminine coming back into balance and integrated wholeness. It also means solo man, walking a path solely in our path as we have been discussing. Okay. And so it's a metaphor or an archetype. And perhaps there was not a real David and Solomon. There are evidence that there was a temple and, you know, a whole structure and kings that came out of that lineage and so forth. But it's really irrelevant, because what we know is that this is the individual journey of a solo man or a solo being, male or female, to integrate soul and mon, the masculine and the feminine, to reintegrate and clear and re-embody the third temple. We are the third temple. It's not a bunch of rocks or steel and glass that they're going to build in Jerusalem. That's the subverted mirroring image. It's about the temple. Okay. And the temple that we occupy has two primary components: peace, integrated wholeness, coming to peace, going to peace, resolving all polarities and so forth, and sovereign integrity. So what is the foundation of this kingdom of life is David, in his ancestral authority, based on the biblical mandate that the law says that he will be a king over the nations, but amongst the people, is that it is a proclamation of peace and sovereign integrity. Okay. And those are the two elements that, when somebody accepts that proclamation that he issues as a offer of contract, because contract creates law, and it's set up on the website that anybody on the planet can accept his offer, and that offer constitutes the acceptance of the sanctuary and the protections and the immunities of this kingdom. Okay. And the reciprocal document is a individual declaration of peace and sovereign integrity as a mandate by my authority as a sovereign being to issue my mandate of non-consent, that I do not consent to be bound and bonded and vaccinated and extrapolated and monetized and all the rest of it. It's just simply establishing on and for the record the non-consent. So it's expediting and streamlining what we've talked about in status correction. It doesn't eliminate that individually we must take that solo path to walk back into our own temple. Okay. But it establishes a new foundation, a new beginning that anybody can take based on the law of this planet to step into and return to life, remove themselves from the realm of death, walk out of Babylon, walk out of the matrix, and begin the healing process. So within that, we've created a society called the Davida Society, the Society for Life. And the body politic of the kingdom is the Davida Society. So we're not accepting vassalage or peonage or any subjugation to another king or another system of priestcraft. We are simply accepting a contract of protections and immunities to protect our standing of non-consent. So that once one does that, then we come together in a unified field using the law and the court that is within the ecclesiastical court of the kingdom. And the word ecclesiastical, remember, there's canon law, ecclesiastical law. The Pope issues canons. That's his law if you attach to it. He establishes that by binding an ecclesia. The body of the congregation is what the word ecclesia means, and then creates law or the priestcraft law to bind the ecclesiastical law. But we can remove ourselves from that and establish our living collective body as the ecclesia, those who have set themselves apart by removing themselves from Babylon or the matrix. And now the ecclesiastical court for the kingdom of David, for the people and the land, then is a priori a court of the ecclesia for the people to claim the true common law, the true natural law, the true universal law, and the equity. And we can process through that court system the settlement and closure of all claims and liabilities that previously attached us to the matrix, and remove ourselves from that. And now we also have a jurisdiction and a law form to create a treasury and a monetary system to monetize value instead of monetizing debt. So that if we want to create value, we just step up and say, we're going to create value. Okay, we will monetize it on a parity system. I create this many units of value, we will monetize that, use it as a circulating medium to create a system of true commerce, true enterprise of exchange of value that we create through our individual capacity to create unique things and then share them together and thrive and build together. So that's what the court of the ecclesia and the law form and the jurisdiction establishes through the website that you looked at.
Wow, that's amazing. I was just the last bit here because I was saying, yeah, but how about the solvency? Because you were talking about stepping in and sovereign and no non-consent, and I was going, but we also need the solvency. We just established that in the beginning of the call, and you've got that right there.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's exciting times.
Yeah. And what's interesting with what's going on with this whole virus thing, remember what I said last time, that the parasite and the artificial intelligence does not know anymore how to create. It can only mimic, it can only use pathological lying, denial of that lie, and projection onto us to try and say, you're the ones who did it, it's not us. Well, that's all coming back to roost, so to speak. But what are they using as their pivot point? This so-called virus, which hundreds and thousands, tens of thousands of scientists and doctors have already come back with vast amounts of evidence that says it doesn't exist. All that a virus is what's called an exosome, which is something that our cells create when we have too much toxicity in our body, and it must issue a solvent. And what does a solvent does? It dissolves something that's encrusted in, whether it's calcification or toxicity or whatever it is, it's a solvent. So this virus is a mirroring of what we need to do ourselves. Obviously not taking a vaccine, not taking their drugs or everything, but do the solvency of dissolving the entanglements that we have accrued during our journey through the dark night of the soul or the valley of death.
And the name of it, the corona, the crown.
Right, yeah.
You know, it's amazing how when you start to see this mirror. Yeah.
And what we need is a big colonic, like you said earlier.
Yeah. A planetary enema.
Yes. I vote for the coffee one.
Okay. With honey and cream, of course, right?
Yeah.
Of course.
Well, this way, not
not the other one.
Yeah, I'll forgo the coffee. It doesn't like me.
Wow.
Well, thank you so much for all of this. It just brings everything, also all these esoteric principles into practice, and I think that it's part of the hijacking, as you spoke about as well, of the whole spiritual reality, where it's so easy to go into the spiritual bypassing and be almost afraid of coming in the embodiment of the life force, where it's like shooting out and space out. So I can just feel the anchoring and the embodiment of these esoteric principle and the universal principles, and we can use that. Wow, it's amazing. Thank you so much.
You have to come back and do this again.
Yeah.
Right.
When do we do it? Tomorrow?
Yeah,
I'll be in touch, and we'll talk about session 3.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
it'd be really exciting to
I'll be
hear.
there.
Once the website goes live and people's reactions to it and all that, it'd be be fabulous to hear how it's all going.
Yeah.
And how we can support the next steps as well. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much, Ken. It's been
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank you for sharing all that you've shared with us.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here together.
And,
And,
do you want to direct our listeners to any websites besides the new one that we will put on the show notes when it's live? But
yeah, well, again, PanTerraPCA.org is where the PanTerra public notices are. It has our foundational documents, our notices to the world administrative bodies like the Vatican, the Holy See, the Lord Mayor, and so forth that we did like 7-8 years ago, and some other key things. So PanTerra with 2 R's, PanTerra, PCA.org, and then GEMSTONE which we described last time. People can enter their data to submit to become a member. And the other thing about that is the PanTerra Society is now being refined into our proactive global or planetary teams for proactive work in the world, for our projects, for our everything we're doing with healing centers and media and everything else. And it does require a full commitment to be 100% fully on board. And we walk people through a beginning education and probationary period to see if it's a proper fit. For many, it's not a proper fit. And so the next layer out, so to speak, is going to be our contract relationships with people who have skills, organizations, and so forth that we will contract to work with to implement our projects and bring forward all the things that PanTerra intends to do. And this is kind of like the reflection of the esoteric, mesoteric, exoteric system of the outer temple, middle temple, core temple. So the outer ring, the exoteric for PanTerra, is the Global Media Alliance. Okay, GEMSTONE Global Media Alliance. We have some people still saying, well, is it round or is it flat? Is it, but Flat Earth Media Alliance just doesn't have that ring. And we were thinking of maybe Pancake Alliance, but we could call it the Marble Media Alliance because a marble is round, we can hold it. But, right now it's called the Global Media Alliance, and it's a decentralized, we're going to build the architecture. It's going to take us time to do that, but it's a model technically to build a decentralized, distributed model of a true platform of free education and media and communications and data systems and all the rest of that. And so that will be a society, because the private society form is part of the law form, using what was the best out of the old system, but not in the public. It's private in our own jurisdiction. So they're private societies. And so the Media Alliance will be like the outer ring of a society, the GMA or the GGMA private society. And I won't go into more detail, but that will be starting launched soon. Parallel to that is the kingdom. Now, the kingdom is David's embodiment as the living beneficiary of the house of David. And he has issued, which will be part of the website we've just talked about, a claim of right and standing for all of his rights, titles, lands, hereditaments, interests, tenements, and soils and properties and so forth. And out of that crown sovereign office that David holds as the living beneficiary issues the government of the kingdom, the courts of the kingdom, and the treasury of the kingdom. So the treasury of the kingdom will be where his hereditaments, tenements, rights, and titles are brought in that will be utilized to create the monetary system that will also be able to be integrated with all nation states and first peoples who wish to enter into a treaty of mutual recognition with the crown. Okay, that's sovereign integrity. That's distributing, decentralizing the sovereignty that was hierarchical in the matrix. Okay, so we have the ability to do that with bodies politic, with the crown, and individually by the acceptance of the offer of sanctuary protections and immunities through what I described earlier. And when one does that, they become a member of the Davida Society, not of the kingdom. Kingdom is a governing body over the nations and working co-creatively in sovereign integrity with nations and first peoples and so forth, and any society that anybody creates on the planet. It's a way to decentralize hierarchical government being a mind control system to bind the minds of the people. So a society is when two or more come together co-creatively in an aligned agreement of what we're going to do as a agreed upon intention. And so the Davida Society is the body politic, and that is the people, not as king subjects, not as priest controlled property or, the rest of it. That's where the people come together. And so there is a similar sort of esoteric, mesoteric, and exoteric relationship. So anybody can become a member of the Davida Society or the Media Society, out of which they access the jurisdiction, the law form. They have the access to the media platform and the data net highway system that we will build, and where everybody can have true laissez-faire enterprise and private interaction using the monetary system that will ride on top of that data highway system. So essentially, that's the new world system we are building.
Brilliant.
Amazing.
Yeah,
So that is
incredible.
Beyond this machinery in the matrix that I said. That's where we're going.
Yes.
So I'll see you there.
Yeah.
See you there. Thank
Thank
you
you
so much,
so
Ken.
much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ken.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thanks.
Thank you for listening. Please find links and information about this episode in the show notes. And come to Holy Land to find all our podcast episodes. Holy Land is where leaders in wholeness and sovereignty meet. Holy Land, where we actively co-create whole and holy nations founded on compassion and freedom. And Holy Land is not for followers nor sheep. Join us on holyland.me. We accompany you there with Believe in You from our household musician John Century. See you in Holy Land. Dare to be different and unleash your genius at our Holy Land membership site, wholyland.me.